of President Trump's supporters here.
Greatest movement in the history of our country.
The Democrat Party is actually working against religion, against freedom, and shutting down churches. I see the Holy Spirit, the evidence of the Holy Spirit working in the president when he takes the kind of actions he does.
We want justice for George Floyd and his family. Everybody agrees on that. But this utter destruction and violence is not the way to do that.
And President Trump brought this back again to the country.
With Joe Biden, he hasn't even condemned Antifa. Just think about that for 1 minute. He hasn't condemned the rioters.
If you voted for Trump, you ain't black.
Yeah, you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
I have to look at myself and think I'm black, because some people say, Herschel, you're not black. I'm like, no, I am black.
HBCUs and the things that the president has done to invest and to support the black community, that's how we grow out of this.
Defunding the police is insane. The police are what protect us all from anarchy.
We are one people, one family, and one glorious nation under God. We will make America great again.
Welcome to Team Trump Online.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Team Trump Online's War Room Weekly, where we take a closer look at President Trump's excellent record of accomplishment on behalf of the American people and contrast that with Joe Biden's dismal record of failure and his terrible ideas for the future. I'm Tim Murtaugh, the communications director for President Trump's re-election campaign, and we are joined today by two wonderful guests. And first, let me welcome Angela Underwood Jacobs is with us today, and you may have seen her testifying on Capitol Hill earlier this week. The sad tale of her brother Patrick, one of the law enforcement officers who was killed in the rioting of the last couple of weeks. Angela, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you so very much. I greatly appreciate the opportunity, myself and my family. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I know it's been a very difficult time for you all. And the Attorney General of the great state of Florida, Ashley Moody. General, thank you very much for being with us.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
So the nation has been paying very close attention to this entire issue following the tragic and horrific death of George Floyd in Minneapolis and the peaceful protests that followed, which were quickly co-opted by outside agitators and people with more non-peaceful thoughts in their heads. And it turned into rioting and looting and all of that. And the reaction to the country and how it erupted into violence in dozens of cities across this country. And in particular, we're going to focus today on how that violence was very often, too often, turned against law enforcement officers. And Angela, very tragically and very sadly, your brother Patrick was one of those who was targeted by the rioters, and he sadly and tragically lost his life. Tell us a little bit about your brother Patrick.
You know, Patrick was a really nice guy. He was the kind of person that would help anybody out in a pinch. If you needed him, he was very dependable. He was a funny guy. He had a great sense of humor, and he was also a very caring person, and at the same time, extremely humble person. And the world is a little bit sadder without him in it. And you know, he left for work that morning, thinking that he was going to come home and have a nice dinner with his fiancée. And he never got that opportunity. And myself and my family, we never got the opportunity to say goodbye. And at the same time, you know, how do you really say goodbye to somebody that you love?
And that's, you know, the heart-wrenching and really the thought that you never want to have when, you know, families of law enforcement officers, every time the officer leaves for home, the family never really knows if that is the last time that they'll be seen, and not knowing if those folks will come home. General Moody, you deal with law enforcement officers all the time as the Attorney General of Florida, and so this is the sort of thing when you see this mob violence in cities all across the country and having it turn specifically targeting law enforcement officers. This just is not something that this nation should stand for, is it?
Absolutely not. And first, let me just say, Angela, the fact that you're willing to share about your brother's life and his personality and who he was as a person. It's so important because in all of this nonsense of attacking police with rocks, bottles, glass, we forget that we're talking about human lives, people with personalities, families that signed up for a dangerous profession that many will not sign up for. You know, I was a judge for over a decade, a federal prosecutor. I am now in general, but I am not just connected to this professionally. I am also the wife of a career law enforcement officer. So personally, I watch what these men and women do on a daily basis for our communities, what they go into when they leave in the middle of the night. I've been on the other side of that, wanting to know what's going to happen. Will we walk in the next morning? These are human beings. They have dedicated their lives, their safety, they've sacrificed for us. And the majority of these men and women in blue are men and women of integrity and honor. And thank you so much for being willing to share your brother's story.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I think that, you know, we have a few people out there that have created this monster of what we're living in right now. And it's an atrocity to the United States of America that we're in the state that we are because of some bad apples out there that are really just taking advantage of a situation. And that's what it's really coming down to. And it breaks my heart to see us in such a place of disarray as a country, because we're so much greater than this. And yet, a few, and I want to say, make sure I'm clear with that, is that a few are taking advantage of what's going on right now, as opposed to coming together and protesting peacefully and learning from the past to make sure that the future is brighter. That's not necessarily where we're at right now, but I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful under the leadership of President Trump and his cabinet.
Angela, I've heard it said over the course of the last couple of weeks that nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop does. And I think hearing you and General Moody talk just there, I think that we are all in agreement that that is exactly a true statement. Can you tell us, why was your brother drawn to law enforcement?
You know, it was innate. It was just a part of him. And I think the feeling of wanting to protect where you live, where you go to the grocery store, where, you know, he grew up in the Bay Area. He's been there his entire life. And that's where my family is from. And if you're going to protect and serve, a lot of these men and women choose to protect and serve in the neighborhoods that they live in. So I think that he had kind of he was very brave, a very brave and strong man. And I think that when I heard that he was shot, that was the first part that was really tough for me, because I think of my brother. I go, how could someone so strong die so senselessly without care or any type of regard for human life? This person ambushed him and his partner. They could not have seen it coming until it was too late. So I'm heartbroken at where we are as a country. I'm heartbroken for the community of Pinole, because again, you know, he knew everyone there, and I don't know of a person that didn't like Patrick, and so I'm mourning his loss, and at the same time I'm mourning for America.
I think there's no question it was a targeting of the uniform, and your brother sadly was the one standing there wearing it that day, and I think we've seen instances of the violent mob reaching out and lashing out and targeting whoever happened to be standing there wearing the uniform of law enforcement, and their job, as your brother and you and your family sadly found out, they put their lives on the line every single day, and their mission is to protect their communities. That's what your brother was doing, and he was targeted because that's what he was doing, which is just an astounding thing and an astounding commentary on an element of the folks who were involved in the rioting. And again, we're talking about the rioters and not the peaceful protesters, but the rioters.
Exactly.
Certainly.
Right.
So that brings us to this notion of defunding police departments that is sweeping the country, sweeping a lot of these major cities from coast to coast. A lot of elected Democrats. This is an issue that is really overrunning the Democrat Party. We're talking about the mayors of our two largest cities, Los Angeles and New York, and elected officials all up and down the line across the country saying, defund the police, which is an amazing thing to think about when you're looking at complete and utter uncontrollable lawlessness. Let's take a look right now at a sampling of some of these Democrats and what they have to say.
I think that the defunding, would you be someone who supports the defunding movement, which is to take money specifically from police departments and put them into education, for example?
I think you do all those other things. You don't need all the money that's going to the police department. So yeah, I mean, the spirit of it, I do support that.
This is what political courage is for. Political courage, there are moments in every person's career where you have to stand up and be willing to say, am I willing to sacrifice everything that I have, all the privileges that I have, so that the right thing can go through? This is one of those moments. This right now is one of those moments. So if you're an elected official that for any reason is on this call, I'm asking you to ask yourself, what are you willing to sacrifice to make sure that overfunded police departments are defunded?
Do you understand that the word dismantle or police free also makes some people nervous? For instance, what if in the middle of the night, my home is broken into? Who do I call?
Yes, I mean, I hear that loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors. And I know, and myself too, and I know that that comes from a place of privilege, because for those of us for whom the system is working, I think we need to step back and imagine what it would feel like to already live in that reality, where calling the police may mean more harm is done.
I will never co-sign on funding a police department that continues to brutalize us. And I will never stop saying, not only do we need to disinvest in police, but we need to completely dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department. The Minneapolis Police Department is rotten to the root. And so when we dismantle it, we get rid of that cancer and we allow for something beautiful to rise. And that reimagining allows us to figure out what public safety looks like for us.
Based on the suggestions of the caucus, based on the work of the task force, that we will be moving funding from the NYPD to youth initiatives and social services. The details will be worked out in the budget process in the weeks ahead.
So that is a sampling of Democrats from around the country talking about very clearly defunding the police. And I want to go back to a clip from the beginning part of that montage that we saw from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, where she was asking people in the context of defunding the police, what are you willing to sacrifice? Are you willing to sacrifice everything so that we can move money away from the police? And here we are, Angela, just having talked about your brother who sacrificed his life in the course of performing his duties in law enforcement. What passes through your mind when you see someone like AOC, who I point out is on Joe Biden's team and has strongly endorsed Joe Biden, when she says that people have to be willing to sacrifice everything? That's what she said. And what she means is moving money away from police into other government programs. When you and your family have experienced such a loss, what are your thoughts about that?
You know, I think that it's a sad state when people put their own personal needs ahead of the communities that they're supposed to serve. I know that eventually she's going to be running again for office, more than likely. And I believe that sometimes people say things that they believe will get them some type of gain in the moment. And I think that that's a very sad occasion. When in fact, I think that what we should do is we need to actually put more money into the police departments as opposed to thinking about defunding. I believe that it's easy for someone to say dismantle as opposed to being in a situation when they need protection from the police department and then they're going to expect for them to show up and serve and protect. But when you don't need them, right in that moment, it's easy to say whatever you want to say. So I think that the entire idea is ludicrous. And I think that the communities that need the protection the most, the underserved communities that there are out there, I think it's going to be even worse for them. So as opposed to being there in a political seat, holding a political seat and looking after your constituents, it actually will do the opposite. So in my opinion, shame on her for saying that. And shame on her for being in a position of authority and stating things as factual when I don't necessarily think that it is. I think that they don't have a plan. It just doesn't make sense, and it's just not logical.
No, and it's a slogan that I think we can all accept that it means what it says. They say defund the police. I don't think there's much room for gray area there and misinterpretation. That's what it means. And General Moody, as somebody very involved in law enforcement, let's say they got their way and they defunded police departments all across the country, in the middle of the night, if somebody breaks into your house or if there's some other problem, if there's a domestic abuse situation and someone picks up the phone and calls 911, who do these folks think will answer the phone on the other end? I mean, what sort of plan is this? What sense does it make?
They're not thinking. The mistake in the question is they're not thinking. They don't care. Hearing AOC talk about courage is laughable. She's not the one that is having to take responsibility and live with themselves when someone dies or is raped because they've defunded their police, or in their words, they've dismantled the police. She just throws these things out there, like when she said we needed to eliminate ICE, who is entirely in charge of helping protect our country from those that would enter. You know, she will not have ultimate responsibility. So courage, she just lobs out these ideas, these things that incite and now have incited riots, violence, attacks against the police. Let me talk about courage for a moment. True courage that AOC will never and can never understand. True courage is rushing into a house in the middle of the night when you've been called to help someone because there's an intruder in the home and they're armed. True courage is going after a serial killer knowing that they don't want to be caught by police, but they need to save lives and they're going to do it because that's what they took an oath to do. That's true courage. True courage is signing up for a profession where you don't know how your shift will end. And you sign up for that profession because you're willing to serve, not because we pay you big bucks, but because you're willing to serve. And Angela said something that was so meaningful. She said her brother just wanted to be part of his community and be a protector, a guardian of it. You know, when we had these people rushing into churches and harming lots of people, I'll never forget my husband looking at me and saying, I will never let that happen. Yeah. Those are the kinds of people that sign up for these jobs. AOC has no idea what she talks about when she talks of courage. And we need to remember that in order to have a free and stable and civilized society, one where a community trusts its government and government is truly working for and on behalf of the people, we have to have men and women willing to enforce our laws and keep us safe. It's fundamental. It is fundamental to our system of government. And I can't believe we are even having this discussion along political lines. When did that happen? And people need to wake up and get out and vote. It is critical to the success and sustainability of our great nation.
Yeah. It is actually shocking that we're even having this conversation. And I would remind folks again that every person that we hear from on the Democrat side who was on board this defund the police train, every one of them is a supporter of Joe Biden and backs Joe Biden. And Joe Biden, pays lip service to this. He has said one sentence, one time, saying, "Oh, I don't really, support that." And then he gave some gobbledygook answer about how he wants to tie the funding for police to some amorphous plan to have some merit system that holds the police to some code of honorableness, whatever that means, in Joe Biden's head. And so let's hear now for a minute from another one of Joe Biden's supporters, the mayor of Seattle, Jenny Durkan, who has endorsed Joe Biden and has been in the news recently for not the best reason. There is what is called an autonomous zone established in the city of Seattle. Several square blocks of the city have been taken over by agitators and protesters. And in fact, the Seattle police evacuated and abandoned a police precinct building and actually turned it over to the protesters. Let's take a look at her recent appearance on CNN.
Got 4 blocks in Seattle that you just saw pictures of that is more like a block party atmosphere. It's not an armed takeover. It's not a military junta. We will make sure that we can restore this, but we have block parties and the like in this part of Seattle all the time. It's known for that. So I think the president, number one, there is no threat right now to the public, and we're taking that very seriously. We're meeting with businesses and residents. But what the president threatened is illegal and unconstitutional. And the fact that he can think he can just tweet that and not have ramifications is just wrong.
The counter will be block parties don't take over a municipal building, let alone a police station, and destroy it, basically thumbing their nose at any sense of civic control. Do you believe that you have control of your city and that you would be able to clear those streets? Because you haven't.
We do, and the chief of police was in that precinct today with her command staff looking and assessing on operational plans. But we saw that it was a point of conflict night after night between the police department and protesters. And we wanted to de-escalate that. And what we decided was the best way to do that was reopen the streets. And that itself ended up with some ramifications for the precinct to remove anything that was valuable out of that building.
So there you have the Democrat mayor of Seattle, Jenny Durkan, who again is a Joe Biden endorser, and she thinks that her plan for leadership and how to counter the fact that protesters have taken over a large segment of her city is to acquiesce to them and withdraw and just let them have the building. And so this is the idea where President Trump says, no, we have to have law and order in the streets. And the Seattle mayor is actually offended by that. And this is what I'm talking about. You know, the Democrat Party has been overrun by the movement. This is a train that has left the Democrat station. And Joe Biden is just a helpless passenger on that train, you know, frankly, whether he knows it or not. And so, Angela, when you see that here is an elected leader in a major American city saying that the best plan of action is to de-escalate and turn over police precinct stations to the protesters and withdraw from that. What in the world does that say to law enforcement officials like your brother Patrick was? What kind of message is that to say we're going to just let the hooligans run amok?
You know, I was a former city councilwoman, and quite frankly, to hear her speak, I was embarrassed. The very idea that you could compare a takeover to a block party? Are you kidding me? I mean, and as I was listening to her, I thought, this just cannot be real. And how does she justify herself? And then I'm praying actually that she takes this tape, takes the tape back and listens to herself, because it sounds almost as though she is in a different reality. Not only that, my other concern too is that if one person decides to start running their city in that particular way, I hope that it doesn't go across America. And then when you talk about defunding, so we're just going to invite chaos into the homes of families, into the streets. People are trying to get to work. People are trying to go to school, all kinds of things. So we're going to invite chaos now? I'm not sure what the mayor was thinking when she made that statement, but I have to say I am thoroughly disappointed, just strictly as a citizen. So I'm hoping that this actually gets rectified quickly and swiftly, and hopefully without getting people in danger, putting people in dangerous way. But that's very, very sad state too.
And it sends a pretty dangerous message to these groups that are organized. Antifa, we know that Antifa, the Attorney General of the United States, has indicated he has evidence that Antifa is involved in a lot of these violent protests. And General Moody, that sends a message, don't you believe, to these groups that if they go into these cities and you've got a Democrat mayor like this, and most cities do have Democrat leadership, that's an invitation that if we go and just commandeer entire city blocks or want to take over an actual police station, that you get a mayor like this, they're going to just let you do it. And so, how do you react to this? It's crazy.
It terrifies me. It terrifies me. This so-called leader of her community is either ignorant about what is really happening in her community, or she is so short-sighted and so ill-informed that she can't see what this leads to. Let me tell you about this block party. This block party has now fencing around it with signs not allowing people in and out, especially police that are there to protect. It has a rapper named Raz who has taken over protection, or let me just say what he calls police duties, walking around threatening people. This is extraordinarily dangerous, extraordinarily dangerous. This has similarities. I'm not even going to say similarities. This is exactly what goes on in Central and Southern American countries, where they will have gang lords overtaking parts where police are not allowed to go in. It is extraordinarily dangerous. The people that live there have no one to protect them, and those that are supposed to be protecting them rule and reign with violence. And the people that are hoping to be protected end up being victimized repeatedly by those that have taken control. That is what those of us that have led in law enforcement and have seen criminal justice systems around the world that don't work, that violate people's rights, that do not protect them. That's what happens. That's what's going on in those countries right now. The fact that that is taking place in this nation is terrifying. Again, we have to get this word out. Thank you for hosting this discussion, because people need to know this is not a simple choice of left or right. This is, do you believe in the fundamentals of law and order in our nation? Do you believe that we need to trust men and women to come in and protect us and give them the power to do that with integrity and honor, of course, but the power to do that? That is the United States of America. That is what we are voting for, and that is why we have to vote for president.
Yeah, and again, this is Joe Biden, one of his supporters, the mayor of Seattle, and we've been over this a lot during the course of this program. You have all these elected Democrats across the country, the mayors of New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles, the Minneapolis City Council, and various members of Congress, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Benny Thompson, a whole variety. And let's not forget the entertainers. John Legend just the other night hosted a fundraiser, headlined a fundraiser for Joe Biden and helped raise him a lot of money. And he's one of the chief anti-police activists on that side. So this is a situation, the defund the police movement. It's something that Joe Biden owns. He uttered one sentence about it one time, and other than that, he's letting the Democrats run crazy with this. He could put a stop to it. He is the leader of the Democrat Party, and he could make them stop. He could say, listen, you guys, this is a bad idea, but he doesn't do that. As far as I know, he hasn't said a word about what's going on in Seattle. Let's remember also, let's go back.
Courage.
Go ahead.
But that would take courage by Joe Biden that AOC wants us all to have, right? It would take courage because it may not be popular with his party. But if you care about the long-term success of this nation, if you care about the United States of America and what it means to so many, you say that this is unacceptable. We cannot not only defund the police, but we cannot undermine them by destroying any sort of support for their morale and their ranks. Good men and women that we ask to do things that so many will not do, have the courage to stand up and say that.
And instead, what we got from Joe Biden, we see he hasn't said anything really, just in passing, about the violence used against police officers. And in fact, members of his campaign, more than a dozen of his campaign staffers, very proudly tweeted about it, very proudly donated to a fund in Minneapolis that was paying the bail for the people who were arrested in the rioting. And so you have this silence as the Democrat Party is running away with this defund the police movement, silence from Joe Biden largely, aside from one sentence of lip service about it, and letting all these elected officials just go and do all these reckless things and say these reckless things, and actually in the case of Seattle, turn over police precincts. And so police organizations didn't take very long to figure out that Joe Biden has gone so far over the deep end and is so afraid to stand up to the extremist elements in his own party who are, let's just say what they are anti-police. He's afraid to stand up to them. And so the police organizations have noticed that, and Joe Biden has turned his back on them. Well, they're walking away from him as well. Let's take a look at that.
But in the wake of George Floyd's death, Joe Biden is no longer showing solidarity with law enforcement, and that has prompted the executive director of the National Association of Police Organizations to no longer show solidarity with Joe Biden. Shannon.
So renewed skepticism on the left over law enforcement, now further complicating Joe Biden's search for a running mate, as well as support from police unions who are increasingly voicing their frustrations with Democrats they say are abandoning them.
Yeah, and I don't think that people have to just say that Democrats are abandoning the police. I think the Democrats are doing a pretty good job of explaining that they actually are and explaining it themselves. So, Angela, again, the reason you're with us is because your brother Patrick was shot and killed as a result of his being on duty as a federal law enforcement officer during one of these riots. When you hear that the Democrat nominee for president, Joe Biden, has effectively turned his back on law enforcement, and that the police organizations have noticed that with some dismay. Why is that something that you think it's important for voters to know?
Well, I feel that, as a leader, specifically an elected official, when you're going to be great, you can't pick and choose when to be great. Maybe it's Monday and Wednesday, but what about Thursday, Friday, and the rest of the days? You want to be great consistently. And I think that right now, again, I believe it's fear. He's thinking that if he doesn't do or say what his party wants him to say, then he won't be able to be elected. But when you have people that make decisions based on fear and based on, I call it greed, actually, then it's never good for the community, ever. We need people in office that lead with a heart that understands the communities that it serves. Also, I believe I heard Biden say that if you don't vote, you're not black if you don't vote for me. Wow, I couldn't believe it. And I thought, is that one of the most ignorant things I've just about ever heard in my life? And I thought, I think that said right there who he really is. So we need to get people that lead with integrity, that show character at all times, and not picking when and where to have character. It should be just who they are. And what we're seeing right now, it's not leadership coming from Joe Biden. This is just him wanting to bring more of the same that we've had in the past. We need someone that's innovative, creative, someone that is making decisions based on everyone, all Americans, not just a few, and not being divisive in the verbiage that they speak when they're speaking to the press or just speaking in general. So I have hope that Trump will be reelected, and that way we can continue the progress that we've already made. There's much more to come, and I think it's better than what we've even seen so far. But when we have leaders out there dividing us intentionally, that's a horrendous time for everybody. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's what we have in the case of Joe Biden is somebody who just clearly doesn't have the strength to stand up to the extremists in this party. And what we're talking about there, the last clip we saw, General Moody, it's about the police organizations who have noticed that and are dismayed by Joe Biden's turning their backs on them. But it's actually more that's important. If you're working with the Florida State Police, for example, they don't like to hear that a guy who's running for president, wants to be president, has turned his back on law enforcement. That's terrible for the police. It's terrible for morale. It's terrible for their belief that they'll have the support they need to keep our communities safe. But more importantly, what does it tell to the people that those police are supposed to be protecting?
Yes.
It means, if you don't support the police force who are protecting our homes and our communities, it means you don't support me. That's what people are thinking. And as the Attorney General of Florida, how do you counter that? If Joe Biden were to somehow become president, how would you counter that? And how does it make law enforcement's job more difficult?
You look no further than President Trump and how you would counter that. What Angela talked about in terms of what we need in leadership, the characteristics that she talked about, you could sum it up by needing someone that was truly courageous. True courage. And true courage is what we talked about. It's coming out and saying what is needed for the United States of America, regardless of what people think, because that's what needs to be done. In fact, when we met on this past week, when I met with the president and law enforcement leaders around the nation, first and foremost, he came out and he said, look, I support the men and women in law enforcement. The majority of these folks are what keeps us safe, which allows us to live as a civilized, productive, loving country. And that does not mean that I am not all in and doing what I can do as president to make improvements on policing and how our communities and police can work together to build that relationship. He's all in. And let me tell you about true courage and true leadership. When he was all in? Not as a result of this horrible, tragic killing of George Floyd. He was all in when he first went into office and the police says, you've done more. They came out and said, you've done more for us, President Trump, than we saw in the last administration and the entire term. He was truly courageous when he said, hey, I'm going to institute a commission on law enforcement. And the mission is, as part of that, to build trust in our communities and law enforcement. When he did that, well ahead of this incident. In fact, in January, that commission took office, and General Barr said at that time that was one of the main purposes. So he is not short-sighted, like we've seen in some of the clips that you've played. He is looking at what needs to be done, how we need to improve our relations within our communities and our police. He's looking at ways we can improve economic opportunities in certain environments, certain cities. He's looking at how we can reform the criminal justice system with the First Step Act. Talk about courage, talk about leadership. That's exactly what Angela was talking about. And I'm glad that's how you handle it. That's how you respond when the so-called leaders of the Democratic Party that are coming out and saying they want to defund our guardians, our protectors. That's how you respond, with true courageous leadership.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up the president, because I think he would agree with you on all those points, but you don't have to take it from me. Let's hear straight from our great president, Donald Trump.
We must defend the rights of every citizen to live without violence, prejudice, or fear. We support the overwhelming majority of police officers who are incredible in every way and devoted public servants. They keep our cities safe, protect our communities from gangs and drugs, and risk their own lives for us every day. No one is more upset than fellow law enforcement officers by the small handful who fail to abide by their oath to serve and protect. My administration will stop mob violence, and we'll stop it cold. This has been a very strong year for less crime. Let's put it that way, less crime. And there's a reason for less crime. That's because we have great law enforcement. I'm very proud of them. There won't be defunding. There won't be dismantling of our police. And there's not going to be any disbanding of our police. Our police have been letting us live in peace, and we want to make sure we don't have any bad actors in there. And sometimes you'll see some horrible things like we witnessed recently, but 99, I say 99.9, but let's go with 99% of them are great, great people, and they've done jobs that are record-setting.
And so, Angela, let's start with you again. That, in my mind, that is exactly the kind of talk that people want to see from their president.
Well, I believe that President Trump, he tells it like it is, and I can appreciate that. And I think that people want to feel safe. They want to feel that they've been seen, and they want to feel that they've been heard. And as long as we can do that consistently, we'll be able to make progress. But President Trump is a very strong leader, and I like that. I want to feel confident in the person that is running the country. So when we look at what's going on within the different communities, we have to make sure that, number one, that we elect the right people to lead the cities, and that they have a true understanding of who it is that they're actually protecting and serving in the city. As an elected official, our first obligation is the people, and we have to make sure that we understand who they are and what the needs are. And then we put plans and strategies into place so that we can make sure that the economy is strong, that we are providing opportunities for education for our children, that we are bringing jobs into the community. It goes with all of these different things. But at the root of all of this, we have to make sure that we're listening and that we're really on the ground. We have to be in the weeds almost with our constituents to make sure that we really know and feel what's going on so that we can make the right decisions.
I think that's exactly right, making the right decisions. And General Moody, that's why it really does matter so much who is in the Oval Office, right? And so we've got President Trump in here now, and we need him back again, 4 more years.
The question is, who do you trust to lead the executive branch in this country? Go back to grade school. The executive branch is charged with enforcing our laws. Who do you trust to lead it as President of the United States of America? Someone who comes out and says in no uncertain terms, I support the men and women in law enforcement, will do everything I can to make sure that their policing practices respect everyone and that everyone is equal under the eyes of the law? Or do you want someone as President of the United States who can't come out and say that the police, the men and women, shouldn't be defunded? It's sounding to me that this is even an issue we are talking about when we're talking about who we want to serve as the head of our executive branch as president. It's pretty clear to me.
Yeah.
Well, this is without question an issue that is not going away. I don't think there's any sign that the Democrat Party is going to drop the defund the police demands, and they're continuing to work on Joe Biden. And we know from experience, based on things that he's done on other issues, that he simply does not have the strength to stand up to the most extreme elements in his Democrat Party. So I want to thank you both. Angela Underwood Jacobs, we appreciate your time here, and I know it's been a very difficult period for you and your family, and we're again very sorry about the loss of your brother Patrick as he was working in the line of duty. And thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate that, and I'm hoping that my brother's memory is we can think of change in a positive way and bring the nation back together again and get rid of a lot of this negativity and fear that we have entrenched in so many of our metropolitan cities. But thank you again for having me and being able to share my story and my brother's story.
Well, amen to all of that, and thank you, Angela, for you and for your willingness to talk to us today. And the Attorney General of the great state of Florida, Ashley Moody, thank you for your time and everything that you're doing to help protect the good citizens of Florida.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And we thank you for watching. This has been another edition of Team Trump Online's War Room Weekly. And before we go, I want to remind you to please download the official Team Trump 2020 app. It's available in all the app stores right now, and it lets you get all the straight news, the real news, straight from the campaign without having to go through the Beltway media filter. It also lets you get involved in the campaign. You can make phone calls from the comfort of your own home and get involved that way and volunteer for the campaign in any number of ways. And when you do all those things, you earn points, which you can cash in to win great prizes, up to and including a picture of yourself with President Trump. So download the Trump 2020 app today. That is our show. But before we go, I would like to take the time to wish a very special happy birthday to our boss and the President of the United States. Happy birthday, Mr. President. And here is a little montage of some others wishing President Donald J. Trump a very happy birthday indeed.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. President. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, Donald Trump.
I just wanted to wish you the happiest birthday of all because you deserve it.
Happy birthday a million times.
Happy birthday from Long Island. Thank you, Mr. President.
We choose truth over facts.
A composite that our sketch artists put together after interviewing Biden event attendees is unveiled.